I found out on Instagram, of all places. There it was. My sister Valeria's perfectly manicured hand adorned with an emerald-cut diamond that looked suspiciously familiar. The caption read, "He asked, I said yes. Can't wait to spend forever with you, Vicente Morales." My throat closed up as I stared at my phone in disbelief. Vicente. My Vicente. Or rather, the man who had been my Vicente until exactly 6 weeks and 3 days ago. I scrolled through the comments, each congratulatory message like a knife to my chest. My cousin Elena had written, "OMG, so happy for you too. You make the perfect couple." My own mother, "My beautiful daughter is getting married. Planning starts tomorrow." And there, among the sea of heart emojis and exclamation points, was my father's comment, "Proud of you, princess. He's a good man." A good man. The same good man who had sat across from me at our favorite restaurant downtown looked me straight in the eye and said he wasn't ready for commitment after 3 years together. The same man who apparently found commitment with my sister less than 2 months later. I hurled my phone across the room where it hit the wall with a satisfying crack. Mochi, my rescue tabby, leapt off the sofa with an offended meow. I couldn't blame him. For a moment, I just sat there, letting the rage and shock wash over me like ice water. Then I grabbed my keys and stormed out of my apartment. The drive to my parents' house took 23 minutes. I knew because I counted every single one of them, gripping my steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. When I pulled into the driveway, I spotted Vicente's black Audi parked next to my sister's Mercedes. Of course they were here. They were probably basking in family congratulations, drinking champagne, and planning their perfect life together. I fixed my face into what I hoped was a neutral expression and walked in without knocking. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses led me to the back patio where, sure enough, my entire family plus Vicente were gathered around the outdoor table. My mother was the first to notice me. "Yolanda, you're here! Did you see Valeria's news?" She beamed at me, completely oblivious to the hurricane raging inside my chest. I forced myself to breathe. "I did," I said, my voice remarkably steady. "Congratulations." Valeria stood up and had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. At 31, she was 2 years older than me and had always been the golden child. Better grades, better job, better everything, and now apparently she had the better claim to my boyfriend. "Yolanda," she started, but I cut her off with a wave of my hand. "No need to explain," I said, even though every cell in my body was screaming for an explanation. "I'm happy for you both." Vicente finally looked at me then. He had the audacity to look guilty, his dark eyes meeting mine for just a second before focusing on something over my shoulder. He cleared his throat. "Thank you, Yolanda," he said formally, as if we were distant acquaintances, as if he hadn't whispered that he loved me every night for 3 years, as if he hadn't known every inch of me, every secret, every fear. "When's the wedding?" I asked, accepting the glass of champagne my father pressed into my hand. "We're thinking. Christmas," Valeria said, visibly relaxing now that I hadn't made a scene. "It's only 6 months away, but we don't want anything too elaborate." 6 months? I repeated, the champagne burning my throat as I took a large swallow. "That's soon." "When you know, Vicente said, squeezing my sister's hand. I watched their fingers intertwine and remembered how those same fingers had wiped away my tears when we broke up. I wasn't ready before, but I am now. Something inside me snapped then. A rubber band pulled too tight, but instead of screaming or throwing my champagne in his smug face, I heard myself saying, "Let me plan it." The patio fell silent. "What?" Valeria asked, her perfectly shaped eyebrows drawing together. "The wedding," I clarified. "Let me plan it for you. I'm an event coordinator after all. It's literally what I do for a living." It was true. I ran my own small events company, specializing in corporate functions and the occasional wedding. But I had never planned a family member's wedding before, let alone my sister's wedding to my ex. "Are you sure?" my mother asked, looking both confused and relieved. She had probably been dreading the process of finding a planner on short notice. "That's a generous offer, mija, but given the circumstances." "I'm sure," I said, looking directly at Vicente. "Consider it my engagement gift to you both, free of charge." Vicente shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but Valeria was already smiling. That same triumphant smile she'd worn when she'd been named valedictorian instead of me, when she'd been offered the job at the prestigious law firm, when she'd bought her first home while I was still renting. "That would be amazing," she said, "if you're really okay with it." "I'm okay with it," I replied, raising my glass in a toast. "To new beginnings." Everyone raised their glasses, relief evident on their faces. No one asked if I was truly okay. No one wondered if this was a healthy way to process betrayal. They just accepted my generosity because it was convenient. As I clinked glasses with my sister and her fiancé, my ex, I smiled. But inside, I was already plotting. Because there was something nobody at that table knew. I was the last person who should be planning this wedding. I knew things about Vicente that would make Valeria's perfect French manicured nails curl. And over the next 6 months, I would make sure she discovered them too. My mother called me the next morning, gushing about how mature I was being about the whole situation. I let her talk, making appropriate noises of acknowledgement as I watered my plants and tried to ignore the pounding headache from last night's champagne and the 3 glasses of wine I'd consumed after leaving my parents' house. "Valeria is so grateful," she said. "She's going to call you today to set up a meeting. She wants to discuss her vision for the wedding." "Her vision," I repeated dryly. "I can't wait. Yolanda." My mother's voice took on that familiar cautionary tone. "I know this must be difficult for you. If you've changed your mind about planning the wedding, we would understand." For a brief moment, I considered backing out. The thought of spending the next 6 months orchestrating my sister's perfect day with the man I had thought would be my husband was nauseating. But then I remembered the look on Vicente's face when he'd said, "When you know, you know." And my resolve hardened. "I haven't changed my mind," I said firmly. "I want to do this." "Okay," she said, not sounding entirely convinced. "Just remember, this is about Valeria's happiness." I bit back a laugh. When had anything in our family not been about Valeria's happiness? "Of course," I said. "I'll talk to you later, Mom." After hanging up, I opened my laptop and created a new folder titled V&V Wedding. Then I opened a separate, password-protected document and titled it The Truth About Vicente Morales. When my phone rang at precisely 10 a.m., I wasn't surprised to see my sister's name on the screen. Valeria had always been punctual to a fault. "Good morning," I answered, keeping my voice professional. "Ready to discuss your wedding plans?" "Yolanda," Valeria said, her voice softer than usual. "Before we start, I just want to say thank you, and I'm sorry. I know this must be strange for you." I closed my eyes, fighting the urge to scream. Strange? Finding a spider in your shoe was strange. Discovering your sister was marrying your ex-boyfriend was catastrophic. "It's fine," I lied. "Vicente and I were over. You two make sense together." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment I thought she might acknowledge the absurdity of the situation. But instead, she said, "Great. So I was thinking a winter wonderland theme. White roses, silver accents, maybe some crystal elements." As she rambled on about color schemes and flower arrangements, I took notes mechanically, hating how easy it was to slip into professional mode. When she finally paused for breath, I asked, "What's your budget?" Another pause. "Well, that's the thing. Vicente said we should keep costs reasonable. He mentioned something about some investments that haven't paid off yet, I perked up at this. What investments? I don't know the details, Valeria said dismissively. Some tech startup he put money into, but Daddy said he'd help with the wedding costs, so it should be fine. Of course our father would foot the bill. He'd never been able to deny Valeria anything. Meanwhile, when I'd started my events business 3 years ago, he'd insisted I take out a loan from the bank to learn financial responsibility. I see, I said, making another note in my private document. And have you discussed finances with Vicente? Joint accounts, prenup, that sort of thing? Yolanda. Valeria sounded scandalized. That's not very romantic. Neither is divorce, I countered. But sure, we can focus on the romantic stuff. Have you picked a venue yet? By the end of our call, I had a basic outline of what Valeria wanted. A lavish winter wedding at the plaza. Hotel, 200 guests, a designer dress, and a honeymoon in the Maldives. All very tasteful, all very expensive, and all very much aligned with Valeria's image as the successful corporate attorney with the perfect life. What she didn't know, what I was counting on her not knowing, was that Vicente was broke. Not just going through a rough patch broke, but deeply, irresponsibly in debt. I knew because he had confessed it to me 3 days before our breakup, after I'd found an overdue notice from his credit card company in his apartment. He'd sworn me to secrecy, promised he would fix things, and then promptly ended our relationship, claiming he needed space. Now I understood why. He didn't need space, he needed money. And Valeria, with her 6-figure salary and our father's generous support, was his ticket to financial stability. I picked up my phone and texted my best friend, Diego. Need to meet. It's about V. Diego responded immediately. Your place, 7 p.m. I'll bring wine. Diego had been by my side through every major disaster in my life, including the Vicente breakup. He was the only person who had asked if I was really okay with planning this wedding. The only one who had looked genuinely concerned when I'd told him my plan. This is either the most mature thing you've ever done or the most psychotic, he'd said. And I'm leaning towards psychotic. Maybe he was right. But as I stared at my sister's extensive wedding wish list, I couldn't help but feel that karma was finally on my side. Vicente had chosen the wrong sister to lie to. And over the next 6 months, I would make sure he regretted it. Diego arrived at my apartment that evening with 2 bottles of red wine and a concerned expression. He knew me too well to believe I was handling this situation as gracefully as I pretended to be. You look terrible, he said, handing me the wine as he walked in. Thank you, I replied dryly, heading to the kitchen for glasses. Always good to have supportive friends. Diego followed me, leaning against the counter as I poured generous amounts of wine into 2 glasses. I'm serious, yo. You've got those weird dark circles under your eyes, and you're doing that thing with your jaw. What thing? That clenching thing you do when you're plotting someone's demise. He took a sip of his wine. So what's the plan? How are you going? To sabotage their wedding? I gasped in mock offense. Sabotage? I would never. I'm going to plan them the most beautiful, perfect wedding ever seen in this city. Uh-huh. Diego raised an eyebrow. And then what? Release doves that poop on the bride? Hire a stripper to jump out of the cake? I laughed despite myself and led him to the living room, where I opened my laptop. Nothing so crude. I'm going to expose Vicente for what he really is, a liar and a fraud. And I'm going to make sure Valeria sees it before she legally binds herself to him. Diego sat next to me, his expression growing serious. Yo, I get that you're hurt. What they did was shitty. But is this really the best deal? Way to handle it? Wouldn't it be healthier to just, I don't know, move on? I gave him a look. Would you move on if your ex started dating your brother 2 minutes after dumping you? Fair point, he conceded. But still, planning their wedding? That's some next-level masochism. It's strategic, I argued, showing him my secret document. Look, I've started compiling everything I know about Vicente's financial situation. He's at least $100,000 in debt, mostly from bad investments and living beyond his means. He drives that Audi but can barely make the payments. He defaulted on his student loans twice. And that tech startup he invested in? It folded last month. Diego whistled low. And Valeria doesn't know any of this? Nope. She thinks he's this successful architectural engineer with a bright future. She has no idea he's eyeing her bank account. And you're going to tell her all this? I shook my head. Not directly. I'm going to create situations where she discovers it herself. It'll be more believable that way. Diego took a long drink of his wine, studying me. You know, most people would just send an anonymous email with all this info and be done with it. That's not enough, I said, my voice hardening. He hurt me, Dee. He looked me in the eye, told me he wasn't ready for marriage, and then proposed. To my sister. I want him to squirm. I want him to know that I know, and I want to watch it all fall apart. Diego sighed. I get it. I do. Just be careful, okay? Don't let this consume you. And maybe consider that Valeria might get hurt in the process too. I felt a twinge of guilt at that. Despite our competitive relationship, Valeria was still my sister. But then I remembered how easily she had accepted Vicente's proposal, knowing full well he had just broken my heart. How she hadn't even had the decency to tell me herself before posting it on social media. She made her choice, I said firmly. Now she can live with the consequences. Diego didn't argue further, but I could tell he wasn't entirely comfortable with my plan. We spent the rest of the evening catching up on other topics, carefully avoiding any more discussion of the wedding. But after he left, I stayed up late, meticulously planning my first move in what I was beginning to think of as Operation Wedding Disaster. The first meeting with Valeria and Vicente was scheduled for the following weekend at my office. I had deliberately chosen Sunday morning, knowing Vicente was not a morning person. Sure enough, when they arrived, he looked slightly disheveled and was clutching a large coffee. Sorry we're late, Valeria said, though they were precisely on time. Traffic was a nightmare, I smiled brightly. No problem at all. I've got everything set up in the conference room. I led them through the small but stylish office space I had rented for my business. 3 years of hard work had paid off in this space, with its modern furniture and wall of windows overlooking downtown. It wasn't as impressive as Valeria's corner office in her law firm, but it was mine, built from scratch with no help from our parents. In the conference room, I had prepared several mood boards based on Valeria's Winter Wonderland theme, along with a detailed timeline and budget spreadsheet. As Valeria exclaimed over the design concepts, I noticed Vicente's eyes lingering on the budget numbers. This all looks expensive, he said, his voice carefully neutral. Quality costs money, I replied, equally neutral. But don't worry, this is just a starting point. We can make adjustments. It's perfect, Valeria declared, shooting Vicente a look that clearly said not to argue. Daddy already said he'd cover most of it. Vicente relaxed visibly at this, which only confirmed my suspicions. I made a mental note to suggest some particularly costly items later, just to see his reaction. Great, I said. So let's talk about the venue. I've made appointments for us to view 3 options this week, including the plaza. But there's also this beautiful new event space that just opened by the river. It's a bit more avant-garde. The plaza is fine, Vicente said quickly. Traditional is better, right? I raised an eyebrow. Actually, the river venue is significantly less expensive. I thought you might prefer to save where we can. Vicente's jaw tightened. Cost isn't the only factor. The plaza has reputation. Reputation is important to Vicente, I said to Valeria with a knowing smile. He's always been concerned with appearances. Valeria looked between us, clearly sensing the undercurrent. Let's see both, she decided diplomatically. We can make a decision after. I nodded, satisfied with this small victory. Perfect. Now, about the guest list. The meeting continued for another hour, during which I subtly pushed Vicente's buttons at every opportunity. By the time they left, he was visibly agitated and Valeria was giving him concerned glances. As I cleaned up the conference room, I felt a mix of satisfaction and shame. The plan was working. I could see the seeds of doubt already sprouting in Valeria's mind. But was Diego right? Was I taking this too far? I pushed the thought away. If Vicente was truly in love with my sister, if their relationship was based on honesty, nothing I did would matter. But I knew better, and eventually Valeria would too. Later that evening, as I was updating my secret document with new observations about Vicente's reactions to the budget discussion, my phone pinged with a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, my heart skipped a beat. We need to talk. Alone. I stared at the message, a mixture of anger and vindication washing over me. So Vicente wanted to talk. After 6 weeks of silence, after proposing to my sister, now he wanted to. I'll talk. I typed out a response. Nothing to talk about. All communications through Valeria from now on. His reply came almost immediately. Please, 20 minutes. Tomorrow at Raoul's, 1 p.m. Raoul's was the coffee shop where we'd had our first date. The audacity of suggesting we meet there made my blood boil. But curiosity won out over pride. What could he possibly have to say to me that he couldn't say in front of Valeria? After a moment's hesitation, I replied, Fine, 20 minutes. As I set my phone down, I realized my hands were shaking. This was an unexpected development in my plan, but maybe it could work to my advantage. If Vicente was worried enough to request a private meeting, it meant my subtle hints about his financial situation had hit their mark. Tomorrow, I would find out just how desperate Vicente Morales really was. I arrived at Raoul's 15 minutes late, a petty but satisfying act of defiance. Vicente was already there, occupying our old favorite table by the window. He stood when he saw me, his expression a mixture of relief and apprehension. Yolanda, he said, pulling out a chair for me. Thank you for coming. I ignored the chair and sat in the one opposite, forcing him to awkwardly retake his seat. Small victories. 20 minutes, I reminded him, checking my watch pointedly. And I've already lost 15 of them. Vicente sighed, running a hand through his dark hair, a gesture I had once found endearing, but now just seemed calculated. Everything about him suddenly felt performative, from his casual yet expensive clothes to the way he leaned forward earnestly. I wanted to clear the air, he began. Yesterday at the meeting, things felt tense. I raised an eyebrow. Did they? I thought it was quite productive. You know what I mean, yo. He lowered his voice. The comments about money, about appearances, it felt like you were trying to send a message. Was I? I kept my expression neutral. I'm just doing my job, Vicente. Planning a wedding involves discussing budgets. He studied me for a moment, clearly trying to gauge how much I knew and what I intended to do with that knowledge. I appreciate you taking on this role, he said finally. It's very gracious of you. But I have to ask, why are you doing it? The question caught me off guard. I had prepared for accusations, for pleas to keep his secrets, even for threats, but not for this direct challenge to my motives. Valeria is my sister, I said automatically. I want her to have the wedding of her dreams. Vicente didn't look convinced. We both know there's more to it than that. Is this some kind of revenge? Are you planning to sabotage us? I laughed, the sound hollow even to my own ears. You have a high opinion of yourself, don't you? Not everything is about you, Vicente. Maybe I'm just trying to be a supportive sister. A supportive sister wouldn't have suggested that avant-garde venue when she knows perfectly well that Valeria has been dreaming of the plaza since she was a child. I felt a flicker of surprise. I hadn't known that about Valeria. Or perhaps I had and had chosen to forget it. Either way, Vicente's knowledge of my sister's dreams stung more than I cared to admit. Fine, I conceded. Maybe I was testing you a little. But can you blame me? You broke up with me claiming you weren't ready for commitment, and 6 weeks later, you're engaged to my sister. Let's just say it raises questions. Vicente had the grace to look ashamed. It wasn't planned, he said quietly. After we broke up, I was a mess. Valeria reached out to check on me, and we started talking. Things just happened. Things don't just happen, I countered. You make choices. You chose to end our relationship, and you chose to start one with Valeria almost immediately after. And now you're choosing to marry her despite... I caught myself before saying too much. Despite what? Vicente's eyes narrowed. I shook my head. Nothing. Look, I've agreed to plan this wedding, and I will. But don't expect me to pretend I'm thrilled about it. Vicente leaned forward, his voice dropping even lower. What did you mean, despite? Despite what, Yolanda? I met his gaze steadily. Despite knowing that you're broke, Vicente, despite the fact that you're marrying my sister for her money. His face paled, but he quickly recovered. That's not true. I love Valeria. Maybe you do, I conceded. But that's not why you're rushing into marriage, is it? You're drowning in debt, and Valeria is your life raft. You don't know what you're talking about, he said, but his eyes darted away from mine. Don't I? The overdue notices? The failed investments? The second mortgage on your condo that you haven't told her about? With each question, Vicente seemed to shrink a little more in his seat. Does Valeria know any of this? Does she know that the man she's planning to spend her life with is hiding a financial disaster from her? Vicente's expression hardened. What do you want? Money? I don't have any, as you've so kindly pointed out. I almost laughed at the irony. I don't want your money, Vicente. I want the truth. Tell Valeria everything. About your debt, about why you really broke up with me. All of it, or I will. You wouldn't, he said, but he didn't sound convinced. It would hurt Valeria as much as it would hurt me. That's the risk I'm willing to take. I stood up, gathering my bag. You have until the engagement party next month. After that, all bets are off. As I turned to leave, Vicente caught my wrist. Yolanda, please. I do love her. This isn't just about money. I pulled my arm away. Prove it. Be honest with her. A real relationship can't be built on lies, Vicente. I walked out of the coffee shop with my heart hammering in my chest, surprised by my own ultimatum. I had come here intending to gather more information to further my plan for a gradual revelation of Vicente's deception. Instead, I had laid all my cards on the table. As I drove back to my office, I wondered if I had made a tactical error. Would Vicente call my bluff? Would he actually come clean to Valeria? And if he did, what would happen to my carefully constructed revenge plan? But another, quieter part of me wondered if I had done the right thing, not for my plan, but for my sister. Despite everything, did Valeria deserve to know the truth before she committed herself to a man who was hiding so much? I pushed the thought away. This wasn't about doing the right thing. This was about justice, about making Vicente pay for his betrayal. If Valeria got hurt in the process, well, she should have thought of that before she agreed to marry my ex-boyfriend. But as I parked my car, I couldn't shake the memory of Vicente's face when he'd said, I do love her. For the first time, I wondered if there was more to their relationship than I had assumed. And if there was, what did that say about what Vicente and I had shared? The engagement party was scheduled for 3 weeks after my confrontation with Vicente at Raúl's. In that time, I saw no evidence that he had taken my ultimatum seriously. Valeria continued with wedding plans, excitedly texting me about dress appointments and flower arrangements. Our mother called daily with new suggestions and concerns, and Vicente avoided me entirely, skipping the venue tours and cake tasting. Appointments with transparent excuses about work commitments. Part of me was relieved. If Vicente had confessed everything to Valeria, it would have robbed me of the satisfaction of exposing him myself. But another part, a part I was trying hard to ignore, was concern for my sister. The closer she got to Vicente, the more inevitable her heartbreak would be when the truth finally came to light. The night of the engagement party arrived, crisp and clear for early July. I had chosen a rooftop venue with sweeping views of the city, knowing it would impress Valeria's law firm colleagues and our extended family. As the event planner, I arrived hours early to oversee the setup, ensuring everything was perfect. The white roses and silver accents Valeria had requested, the champagne tower, the string quartet playing softly in the corner. By the time guests began to arrive at 7, I was exhausted but satisfied with the results. The space looked magical in the fading sunlight, candles flickering on every table and fairy lights strung overhead. It was exactly the sophisticated, elegant affair Valeria had wanted. "This is incredible," Diego said, appearing at my side with 2 glasses of champagne. He handed one to me, taking in the scene. "You've really outdone yourself, yo." I accepted the glass gratefully. "Thanks, it's what she wanted." Diego gave me a searching look. "And are you okay with that? Giving her exactly what she wants, even after everything?" I took a long sip of champagne before answering. "I'm doing my job. The fact that the client is my sister and her fiancé is irrelevant." "Uh-huh," Diego said skeptically. "That's why you look like you haven't slept in days and you're on your 3rd outfit change of the evening." He wasn't wrong. I had agonized over what to wear tonight, finally settling on a midnight blue dress that I knew highlighted my best features without overshadowing the bride-to-be. It was petty perhaps, but I wanted to look good, for my own ego, and maybe, just maybe, to remind Vicente of what he had given up. "It's complicated," I admitted, "but I'm handling it." "If you say so," Diego replied. "Just remember, I'm here if you need backup or an alibi." I laughed despite myself. I'll keep that in mind. The party was in full swing by 8, the rooftop crowded with well-wishers. Valeria looked radiant in a white cocktail dress, her dark hair swept up elegantly. Vicente stayed close to her side, charming our relatives and her colleagues with practiced ease. From a distance, they looked like the perfect couple, successful, attractive, in love. It made me sick. I was about to step outside for some air when my mother cornered me by the bar. "Yolanda, mija, everything is beautiful," she gushed, kissing my cheek. "You've done such a wonderful job." "Thank you, Mom," I said, managing a smile. "I'm glad you're enjoying it." "And you?" she asked, her expression turning serious. "Are you enjoying it?" The question caught me off guard. My mother wasn't usually one for emotional check-ins. "I'm fine," I said automatically. She studied me for a moment. "You know, when I was your age, I thought I knew what my life would look like. Who I would marry, how many children we would have, where we would live. None of it turned out the way I planned." She glanced over at Valeria and Vicente. "Sometimes the universe has other ideas." "Are you saying Vicente was always meant to be with Valeria, not me?" I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. My mother sighed. "I'm saying that sometimes what feels like the end of the world is actually just a door closing so another can open. You're young, successful, beautiful. There's a whole future waiting for you that has nothing to do with Vicente Morales." I was saved from responding by the clinking of a glass. My father stood at the center of the rooftop, calling for everyone's attention. "If I could have everyone's attention, please, I'd like to propose a toast to my beautiful daughter and her fiancé." The crowd quieted as my father launched into a heartfelt speech about love and family. I hung back, watching as Vicente stood, with his arm around Valeria's waist, nodding and smiling at all the right moments. He looked every inch the devoted fiancé, the successful professional, the man who had it all together. But I knew better. And as I observed him more closely, I could see the cracks in his facade, the slight tenseness in his shoulders, the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes, the nervous glance he cast in my direction when my father mentioned honesty as the foundation of a good marriage. As the speech concluded and everyone raised their glasses in a toast, I made my decision. I had given Vicente a chance to come clean, and he had chosen to continue his deception. Now it was time for Plan B. I made my way to the small office at the back of the venue where I had stored my laptop and event supplies. Pulling out my phone, I sent a quick text to Diego. "It's time. Operation Wedding Disaster is a go." His response came immediately. "You sure about this?" I wasn't sure. Not completely. But watching Vicente play the role of the perfect fiancé while hiding the truth from my sister had crystallized something for me. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about protecting Valeria from making a terrible mistake. "I'm sure," I texted back. Then I opened my laptop and began implementing the next phase of my plan. The weeks following the engagement party passed in a blur of wedding preparations. Valeria had settled on a dress, a ridiculously expensive Vera Wang that made our mother cry when she tried it on. The plaza was booked for the weekend before Christmas, and Vicente continued to avoid being alone with me, always finding an excuse to leave whenever the conversation turned to finances. But while the happy couple was caught up in their wedding bubble, I was busy setting my trap. I had carefully reviewed all the information I had on Vicente's financial situation and formulated a plan to bring it to light without directly exposing myself as the source. The opportunity presented itself sooner than I expected. In early September, 3 months before the wedding, Valeria called me in a panic. "The wedding planner from the plaza just called," she said, her voice tight with stress. "They haven't received the deposit, and if we don't pay by the end of the week, we lose our date." I feigned surprise. "That's strange. I thought Vicente was handling that payment." "He was supposed to," Valeria said. "But when I called him about it, he said there was some mix-up with his accounts and asked if we could use my credit card instead. He promised to pay me back, but what?" I prompted, even though I could guess what was coming. This isn't the first time there's been an issue with money," Valeria admitted. "Last month, when we were looking at apartments, the real estate agent called to say his credit check didn't go through. And then there was that weird call from someone named Marco asking about an investment." I felt a surge of vindication. The cracks were starting to show. "Have you asked him about these things directly?" Valeria sighed. "I tried, but he gets defensive. Says I don't trust him. And maybe he's right. Maybe I'm overthinking this. Everyone has financial hiccups sometimes, right?" "Right," I agreed, choosing my words carefully. "But marriage is a partnership. You should be able to talk openly about money." "I know," Valeria said, sounding uncertain. "Maybe I'll try again tonight." After we hung up, I sat back in my chair, thoughtful. Valeria was starting to notice the red flags on her own, but she was still making excuses for Vicente. She needed more concrete evidence before she would truly doubt him. It was time to accelerate my plan. The next day, I scheduled a meeting with Vicente to go over wedding details. When he arrived at my office, he looked nervous, his usual confidence nowhere to be seen. "Thanks for coming," I said, all business. "I wanted to discuss the rehearsal dinner. Traditionally, the groom's family handles that expense, but since your parents aren't able to attend from Mexico, I wasn't sure what the plan was." Vicente shifted uncomfortably. "I'm going to take care of it," he said. "I've been looking at a few restaurants." "Great," I said, opening a folder on my desk. I took the liberty of contacting a few places myself. This one seemed particularly suitable. I slid a proposal across the desk for an upscale steakhouse downtown with a minimum spend of $10,000 for a private room. Vicente paled visibly. "This is more than I was thinking." "Oh?" I raised an eyebrow. "It seemed in line with the rest of the wedding budget. Is there a problem?" "No," he said quickly. "No problem. It looks perfect." "Excellent. They'll need a 50% deposit by next week to hold the reservation." I made a note in my planner. Should I tell them to contact you directly? Vicente hesitated. Actually, could they send the invoice to both of us? Sometimes I miss emails when I'm traveling for work. Sure, I said, knowing full well he wanted Valeria to see the invoice first so he could avoid paying it himself. No problem. I moved on to other details, watching as Vicente became increasingly uncomfortable with each new expense I mentioned. By the end of our meeting, he was barely able to maintain his composure. As he was leaving, I called after him casually. Oh, and Vicente? Valeria mentioned something about a mix-up with the Plaza deposit. Is that sorted now? He froze momentarily before turning back with a forced smile. All taken care of, just a misunderstanding. I nodded, not believing him for a second. Good to hear. We wouldn't want to lose that date. After he left, I picked up my phone and made a call to an old friend who worked at the bank where I knew Vicente had his accounts. It wasn't entirely ethical, but desperate times called for desperate measures. Hey, Sophia, I said when she answered. Remember that favor you owe me? I need to cash it in. 2 days later, a manila envelope arrived at my apartment. Inside was exactly what I'd asked for. Copies of Vicente's bank statements for the past 6 months, showing a pattern of overdrafts, declined payments, and desperate transfers between accounts. Also included was documentation of the second mortgage he'd taken out on his condo 3 months ago, right around the time he proposed to Valeria. I stared at the papers, a mixture of emotions washing over me. Vindication, yes, but also sadness. Vicente was in even worse shape financially than I had realized. His accounts were practically empty, and he was juggling multiple maxed-out credit cards. If he married Valeria without her knowing the truth, he would drag her down with him. I had what I needed to expose him completely. The question now was how to do it in a way that Valeria would have to acknowledge, without making it obvious that I had obtained the information illegally. The answer came to me the next morning as I was reviewing the wedding timeline. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for 2 days before the wedding, with family and the bridal party in attendance. It would be the perfect setting, intimate enough for the revelation to be personal, but public enough that Vicente couldn't easily dismiss or explain away the evidence. I began making preparations, carefully crafting a plan that would expose Vicente's deception while maintaining my own plausible deniability. It was delicate work, balancing my desire for revenge with my growing concern for Valeria's future. Because that was the complication I hadn't anticipated when I started this scheme. The more I watched Valeria struggle with her doubts about Vicente, the more I remembered that she was still my sister. We had our differences, our rivalry, but did I really want to see her humiliated in front of our family? Did I want to be the one to shatter her dreams, even if those dreams were built on lies? As the wedding date approached and my plan solidified, these questions haunted me more and more. I found myself lying awake at night, questioning my motives, my methods, even my basic assumption that Valeria deserved to know the truth. Was I really doing this to protect her? Or was I still driven by hurt and jealousy, wanting to punish them? Both for the pain they had caused me? I didn't have an answer, and as the rehearsal dinner drew nearer, I began to wonder if I ever would. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for December 22nd, a Thursday evening, at the upscale steakhouse I had suggested. To my surprise, Vicente had managed to pay the deposit, though I suspected he had borrowed the money from someone, possibly even my father. I arrived early, as usual, to make sure everything was set up correctly. The private dining room looked elegant, with dark wood paneling and soft lighting. Place cards marked each setting, with Vicente and Valeria at the head of the table, flanked by their parents. My seat was near the far end, beside Diego, who had been invited as my +1 despite not being in the wedding party. "You sure about this?" Diego asked for the 10th time as we inspected the room together. "It's not too late to back out." I touched the small USB drive in my pocket, the one containing copies of all Vicente's financial documents, along with a carefully edited video compilation of him dodging questions about money over the past months. I had asked the restaurant manager to have a projector available for toasts, and he had happily complied. "I'm sure," I said, though my stomach was in knots. He had his chance to come clean. He chose to keep lying. Diego looked unconvinced, but didn't argue further. We took our seats as other guests began to arrive. Our cousins, Valeria's maid of honor, Vicente's best man who had flown in from Mexico. My parents arrived, my mother fussing about the seating arrangements while my father headed straight for the bar. Valeria and Vicente were the last to arrive, making an entrance like the power couple they aspired to be. My sister looked beautiful, in a cream-colored cocktail dress, but there was tension around her eyes that I recognized immediately. They had been arguing. Dinner proceeded smoothly at first. Wine flowed, conversation buzzed around the table, and the food was excellent. I barely touched my steak, too nervous about what I was about to do. The USB drive felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket. As dessert was being served, I caught the manager's eye and nodded slightly. He disappeared briefly, returning with the projector I had requested. My heart pounded as I prepared to stand up and make my move. But before I could, Vicente tapped his glass with his fork, calling for everyone's attention. "If I could say a few words," he began, his voice slightly unsteady. I froze, watching him warily. "First, I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," Vicente continued. "Especially my future in-laws, who have been so welcoming." He nodded to my parents. "And to Yolanda, for planning not just this dinner, but our entire wedding. We couldn't have done it without you." There was a murmur of agreement around the table, and all eyes turned to me briefly. I managed a tight smile, wondering where Vicente was going with this. "But there's something I need to say," he went on, his expression growing serious. "Something I should have said a long time ago." He turned to Valeria, taking her hand. "I haven't been completely honest with you." A hush fell over the room. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Was Vicente actually going to confess? "I've been hiding something," he admitted, his voice dropping so that everyone had to lean in to hear. "Something I'm not proud of. The truth is, I'm in financial trouble. Serious trouble." Valeria's expression shifted from confusion to shock. "What do you mean?" Vicente took a deep breath. "I made some bad investments. I took out loans I couldn't repay. And I've been too ashamed to tell you just how bad things are. But I can't go into our marriage with this secret between us." I sat frozen in my seat, stunned by this unexpected turn of events. After months of deception, Vicente was finally coming clean, stealing my thunder in the process. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Valeria asked, her voice tight with emotion. "I was afraid," Vicente admitted. "Afraid you wouldn't want to marry someone who had failed so completely. Especially after—" He glanced in my direction, then quickly away. "After what happened with me and Yolanda." A wave of whispers swept around the table. I felt my face grow hot as everyone tried not to look directly at me. "What does Yolanda have to do with this?" Valeria asked, a new edge to her voice. Vicente hesitated. "Nothing," he said finally. "It's just the timing of everything. Breaking up with her, then starting things with you. I know how it looked, but I need you to know that my feelings for you are real, Valeria. The financial mess I'm in, that's real too. But so is what I feel for you." There was a long, uncomfortable silence. I could feel Diego's hand on my arm, steadying me. Part of me wanted to stand up, to reveal that I had known all along, that I had been planning to expose Vicente myself tonight. But another part, a part I had been ignoring for too long, recognized that this moment wasn't about me. Finally, Valeria spoke. "I appreciate your honesty, Vicente. It's about time." Her voice was cool, controlled, the voice she used in the courtroom. "But I think we need to discuss this privately." "Of course," Vicente agreed quickly. I wanted to do this here, in front of everyone, so you'd know I'm serious. No more secrets." My father cleared his throat awkwardly. "Perhaps we should give you two some privacy." "No," Valeria said firmly. No more family secrets, Dad. That's part of the problem, isn't it? Everyone in this family keeps things bottled up, hidden away. We pretend everything is perfect when it's not. She looked directly at me then. Did you know about this, Yolanda? All eyes turned to me. I hesitated, the USB drive heavy in my pocket. Yes, I admitted finally. I knew. For how long? Since before they broke up, I said quietly. He told me right before our breakup. Valeria's expression darkened. And you didn't think to mention this to me? Your own sister? I met her gaze steadily. Would you have believed me? Or would you have thought I was just being jealous and petty? She didn't answer, which was answer enough. I was going to tell you tonight, I continued, pulling out the USB drive. I have proof, bank statements, credit reports, everything. I thought you deserved to know the truth before you married him. Valeria stared at the USB drive, then at me, a myriad of emotions crossing her face. So this whole time, playing the supportive sister, planning our wedding, it was all just a setup? You were just waiting for the right moment to ruin everything? Put. Like that, my plan suddenly seemed petty and vindictive. It wasn't like that, I protested. Well, not entirely. At first, maybe. But then I just wanted to protect you. Protect me? Valeria laughed bitterly. That's rich, coming from you. You've always been jealous of me, Yolanda. Always competing, always trying to prove you're better. And when Vicente chose me, he didn't choose you, I snapped, my composure finally breaking. He chose your bank account, your status, your connections. He was drowning in debt and needed a lifeline. I was just collateral damage. The room fell silent again, everyone watching our sisterly showdown like it was a tennis match. Even Vicente seemed at a loss for words, his confession hijacked by our long-simmering sibling rivalry. It was Diego who finally broke the tension. Okay, I think we all need to take a breath here, he said, standing up. Maybe this isn't the best venue for this conversation. No, it's the perfect venue, Valeria said coldly. Since apparently my entire relationship has been built on lies. Lies from Vicente about his finances. She turned to him. And let me guess, lies about why you broke up with my sister too? Vicente looked trapped. It wasn't that simple. It never is, I murmured. I need some air, Valeria announced abruptly, standing up. Excuse me. She strode out of the dining room, leaving an awkward silence in her wake. After a moment's hesitation, I followed her. I found her in the ladies' room, gripping the edge of the sink, her knuckles white. Valeria, I said tentatively. She looked up, meeting my eyes in the mirror. What do you want? To gloat? To say, I told you so? I shook my head. No, I wanted to make sure you're okay. She laughed, a hollow sound. Oh, I'm just great. My fiancé is broke and has been lying to me for months. My sister has been plotting against me instead of supporting me. And our entire family just witnessed my humiliation. I'm fantastic. I flinched at her assessment, but couldn't deny the truth in it. I'm sorry, I said quietly. I didn't handle this well. No, you didn't, she agreed. But then, unexpectedly, her expression softened slightly. But neither did I. I knew how you felt about Vicente. I knew it was too soon. But I convinced myself it was fate, that we were meant to be together. I wanted to believe I had finally found something perfect. The vulnerability in her voice caught me off guard. Valeria rarely admitted to wanting anything, let alone needing validation or reassurance. In our family's mythology, she was the golden child, the one who had everything figured out. Nothing's perfect, I said, especially not Vicente Morales. That actually got a small laugh out of her. Apparently not. She sighed, turning to face me directly. Why didn't you just tell me the truth, yo? Why the elaborate scheme? I considered deflecting, making excuses, but it was time for honesty. Because I was hurt, I admitted. Hurt that he left me for you. hurt that you accepted his proposal, knowing how recently we had broken up. I wanted you both to pay for that." Valeria nodded slowly. "I understand that. I do. But didn't you think about how your plan would affect me? Did you even care?" The question hit me like a physical blow. Had I cared? Really cared about Valeria's feelings, beyond the satisfaction of exposing Vicente? "I thought I was protecting you," I said again, but the words sounded hollow, even to my own ears. But maybe I was so focused on getting back at Vicente that I didn't think enough about what it would do to you. And for that, I am truly sorry. Valeria studied me for a long moment. "We're messed up, aren't we? This whole competitive thing we've had going our entire lives. It's not healthy." "No," I agreed. "It's not." "Do you know why I've always pushed so hard to be perfect?" she asked suddenly. "To win at everything?" I shook my head, surprised by the question. "Because I was trying to live up to you," she said, softly. "You were always Mom and Dad's favorite, the creative one, the passionate one. I was just the reliable daughter who did everything by the book." I stared at her in disbelief. That's crazy. You were the golden child. Straight A's, law school, perfect career. I was always playing catch-up." Valeria laughed again, but this time there was genuine amusement in it. "So we've both spent our entire lives competing against a version of each other that doesn't even exist?" Put that way, it did seem absurd. I found myself laughing too, the tension between us easing slightly. Apparently so. We stood there for a moment, the revelation hanging between us. Then Valeria sighed. "What am I going to do about Vicente?" I hesitated. "That's your decision, but if you want my opinion, I think you deserve better than a man who lied to you from the beginning." "Even if he comes clean now? Even if he really does love me?" I considered this. Maybe he does love you. I don't know. But starting a marriage with this much deception... I shook my head. "It's a rocky foundation, Val." She nodded slowly. "I need to think. About Vicente, about the wedding." She looked at me directly. "About us too. This thing between us, it has to change. I'm tired of competing with you." "Me too," I admitted. "Maybe it's time we tried being sisters instead of rivals." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Maybe it is." She straightened up, checking her reflection one last time. "I should get back out there, handle this mess like the professional I am." "Want backup?" I offered. She considered for a moment, then nodded. "Actually, yes. That would be nice." We walked back to the private dining room together, not quite reconciled, but at least united in purpose. When we entered, the conversation that had been buzzing around the table immediately died down. All eyes turned to us expectantly. Valeria cleared her throat. "I apologize for the drama," she said, addressing the room at large. "Thank you all for coming tonight. However, given the circumstances, I think it's best if we end the evening here." There was a murmur of agreement as people began to gather their things, clearly relieved to escape the awkward situation. My parents approached us, my mother looking worried, my father uncomfortable. "Mija, are you all right?" my mother asked Valeria, touching her arm gently. "I will be," Valeria assured her. "But the wedding is on hold for now. Vicente and I have a lot to discuss." Vicente, who had been hanging back, stepped forward hesitantly. "Valeria, can we talk? Privately?" She regarded him coolly. "Not tonight. I need time to process everything. We'll talk tomorrow." He looked like he wanted to argue, but thought better of it. "Of course, whatever you need." As the guests filed out, offering awkward goodbyes, I found myself standing with Diego near the exit. "Well," he said quietly, "that didn't go quite according to plan." "No," I agreed, "but maybe that's for the best." He gave me a searching look. Are you disappointed? That you didn't get to deliver the big dramatic reveal yourself? I considered the question honestly. A little, I admitted. But mostly I'm just tired. Tired of being angry. Tired of plotting revenge. Diego nodded, understanding. So what now? I watched as Valeria spoke quietly with my parents, her posture straight and dignified despite everything. Now, I said, I think I need to focus on being a better sister and maybe figuring out who I am without all this drama and competition. I like the sound of that, Diego said, slipping his arm through mine. Let's get out of here. I think we could both use a drink. As we left the restaurant, I glanced back one last time. Vicente stood alone at the empty table, looking lost. For the first time in months, I felt no satisfaction in his distress, only a weary sort of pity. Whatever happened between him and Valeria now, my part in this drama was over. It was time to move on. And as Diego and I stepped out into the cold December night, I felt lighter somehow, as if I had set down a heavy burden I'd been carrying for too long. The future was uncertain. The wedding might still happen, or it might not. Valeria and I might build a real relationship, or we might revert to our old patterns. But for the first time in months, the possibility of change felt like a promise rather than a threat. The days following the rehearsal dinner passed in a blur of cancellations and diplomatic explanations. The wedding was officially postponed, indefinitely, which everyone understood was code for probably not happening. I handled the logistics of notifying vendors and returning deposits, falling back on my professional skills to navigate the awkward situation. Valeria had moved temporarily into our parents' house, needing space from Vicente, while she decided what to do. To everyone's surprise, mine especially, she had asked me to come over for dinner 3 days after the rehearsal dinner fiasco. It was just the two of us, sitting at the kitchen island with takeout containers and glasses of wine. So, I said, after we had exhausted small talk about the weather and my mother's new hobby of pickleball, have you decided about Vicente? Valeria sighed, swirling her wine. Yes and no. We've talked, a lot. He's been completely transparent about his finances now. It's even worse than what you knew, yo. He's basically bankrupt. I winced. I'm sorry. Don't be. Better to know now than after we're married. She took a sip of wine. The thing is, I do believe he loves me. That part wasn't a lie. But, love isn't enough, is it? Trust is essential, and he broke that from the beginning. She shook her head. I told him I need time, that we both need to work on ourselves before we can even think about a future together. I nodded slowly. That sounds wise. What about you? She asked, catching me off guard. What's next for you, yo? I hadn't given it much thought, too consumed with the wedding drama and its aftermath. I don't know, I admitted. Focus on my business, I guess. Try to book some clients who aren't family members marrying my exes. Valeria laughed, a genuine sound that I realized I hadn't heard from her in years. Fair enough. She hesitated, then added, You know, you're really good at what you do. The wedding planning. I mean, even with all the complications, you created something beautiful. The compliment warmed me in a way I hadn't expected. Thanks. It's what I love doing. I was thinking about that, Valeria said, setting down her glass. About what we each love doing. You've always had that clarity, knowing you wanted to plan events, create experiences for people. I envied that. You did? I was genuinely surprised. But you're a successful attorney. You've always known exactly what you wanted. She shook her head. I knew what I was supposed to want. What would impress Dad, what would look good on paper. But do I love litigation? Not really. It pays well and I'm good at it, but it doesn't light you up. I finished for her, understanding, dawning. What would? If you could do anything? Valeria looked almost shy. Promise not to laugh? Cross my heart. I've always wanted to work with young women on financial literacy. help them understand money, investing, how to avoid the kind of traps Vicente fell into. There's such a gap in education there, especially for girls from backgrounds like ours. I stared at her, amazed by this revelation. Val, that's amazing, and you'd be perfect for it. You have the financial knowledge, the legal background, the teaching skills. You think so? She looked genuinely uncertain, a vulnerability I wasn't used to seeing in my always confident sister. I know so, I said firmly. And you know what? I could help you launch it. Plan events, workshops, maybe even a conference. We could be a pretty good team if we stopped trying to beat each other all the time. The idea had come to me spontaneously, but as soon as I said it out loud, it felt right. Valeria and I, working together instead of against each other. Combining our strengths instead of using them as weapons. Valeria's eyes lit up. You would do that? Even after everything? Especially after everything, I said. Maybe this whole mess happened for a reason. Maybe it was the wake-up call we both needed. It was dramatic, perhaps even a bit cheesy. But in that moment, I truly believed it. The painful, twisted path that had led us here, Vicente's betrayal, my scheming, the public confrontation, had somehow cleared the way for a new kind of relationship between Valeria and me. Sisters, Valeria said softly, raising her glass. Not rivals. I clinked my glass against hers. Sisters, I agreed. In the weeks that followed, our tentative new alliance grew stronger. We began meeting regularly to sketch out plans for what we were calling the Financial Empowerment Project, a nonprofit initiative aimed at young women from underserved communities. Valeria would handle the educational content, and I would manage the events and outreach. The first test of our partnership came in February, 2 months after the wedding that wasn't, when we co-hosted a charity gala to launch the project. The event was held at the same Plaza Hotel that should have hosted Valeria's wedding, a decision that raised some eyebrows but felt right to both of us, a way of reclaiming the space and transforming it from a symbol of deception to one of new beginnings. As I watched Valeria address the crowd of donors and supporters, speaking passionately about the importance of financial literacy for young women, I felt a surge of pride that was entirely new to me. This wasn't the grudging admiration mixed with resentment that I'd felt toward her accomplishments in the past. This was pure, uncomplicated pride in my sister and what we were building together. Vicente had not been invited to the gala, of course, but his presence lingered in subtle ways. The lessons of his deception were woven into Valeria's speech about transparency and honest communication around money. And in my own work organizing the event, I had been careful to ensure every financial detail was clear and above board. No hidden costs, no surprise expenses. After the speeches, as guests mingled and pledged donations to our new initiative, Diego found me by the bar. "Look at you two," he said, nodding toward Valeria, who was deep in conversation with a potential corporate sponsor. The dynamic duo. Who would have thought it 6 months ago? I smiled. Not me, that's for sure. I was too busy plotting revenge to see the possibility of reconciliation. "Speaking of revenge," Diego said, lowering his voice. "Have you heard from the man himself recently?" I shook my head. Not directly. From what I understand, he's moved back to Mexico to stay with family while he sorts out his finances. Valeria's still in contact with him, not romantically, but she's helping him create a debt repayment plan. I laughed at Diego's surprised expression. I know, it's weird, but that's Val, turning even a broken engagement into a teaching opportunity. And you're okay with that? Her keeping in touch with him? I considered the question seriously. I am, actually. Vicente isn't a villain in my story anymore. He's just a guy who made bad choices and hurt people in the process. I shrugged. Besides, I have more important things to focus on now. Diego raised his glass. To moving on, then. To moving on, I agreed, clinking my glass against his. Later that evening, as the gala wound down and the last guests departed, Valeria and I found ourselves alone in the grand ballroom, surrounded by the remnants of our successful event. "Well, little sister," Valeria said, slipping off her high heels with a sigh of relief, "I think we did it. 20 corporate sponsors, $30,000 in individual donations, and coverage in 3 major business publications. Not bad. For our first collaboration," I agreed, perching on the edge of a table, though I still think we should have gone with the ice sculpture of a piggy bank. Valeria laughed. "Next time." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the kind of silence that had never existed between us before, free of competition, comparison, or hidden resentments. "You know," Valeria said finally, "in a weird way, I should thank Vicente. If he hadn't been such a disaster, we might never have found our way here." I raised an eyebrow. "Are you saying you're glad he proposed to you 6 weeks after dumping me? Because that's a bold take, sis." She grinned. "Not exactly. But I am glad we finally broke the pattern we've been stuck in since childhood. And if it took a lying, financially irresponsible ex-boyfriend to do it," she shrugged, "maybe it was worth it." I couldn't quite go that far. The pain of Vicente's betrayal had faded, but it hadn't disappeared entirely. Still, I understood what she meant. Sometimes it takes a crisis to create an opportunity for change. "To new beginnings, then," I said, raising an imaginary glass. Valeria mimicked the gesture. "To new beginnings." As we gathered our things and prepared to leave, I glanced around the ballroom one last time. 6 months ago, this space had represented everything I had lost. The future I had planned with Vicente, the wedding I had imagined for myself. Now it stood for something entirely different. A partnership with my sister, a meaningful project that could help others, a future I had never envisioned but was eager to explore. The journey from that moment of discovery on Instagram to this night had been painful, messy, and at times ugly. I had acted out of hurt and anger, plotting revenge instead of confronting my feelings directly. Valeria had ignored red flags and chosen convenience over honesty. Vicente had lied to protect himself, hurting us both in the process. But somehow, through all the deception and drama, we had found our way to something true. Not a fairy tale ending. There was still work to do, trust to rebuild, patterns to unlearn. But a beginning, honest and imperfect and real. And as Valeria and I walked out of the plaza arm in arm, sisters instead of rivals for the first time in our adult lives, I realized that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.